Hello, everybody, and welcome to Customer Communication in Crisis, what print media can learn from digital media. This presentation is really important to me because it is based in reality of the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic. In the United States, we are also in the middle of a social situation, which has caused certainly branding and messaging and lines to be drawn. And it is affecting consumer behavior, as all of this is affecting consumer behavior. And it is also affecting how we may want to consider, who we, defining who we are, how we speak, and the people that we want to attract, using this moment in time as the baseline of everything moving forward. When it comes to consumer research, there is no better go-to in my world than Compare Media. I have been very lucky to befriend Lily Harder, who has done amazing presentations with us. And she was kind enough to introduce me to two of her colleagues, Jeanette, I forgot your last name. I had to say it again, but I'm gonna go, Jeanette
Ornelas.
Ornelas, thank you. There you are. You're on the mic. Sorry that. I always want to say Ornelas, but that's not right. Ornelas and Rachel Arndt. And I'm really going to turn it over to them right now. And please, ladies, let everybody know what you do at Compare Media. And again, thank you so much for your time and thought leadership on this topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. I'll introduce myself first and then let Rachel take it away. I'm Jeanette Ornelas. I'm a senior digital analyst on the Compare Media Omni team. And I've actually been at Mintel for a little over 5 years now, working first across our reports business, very consumer focused, and now on our Compare Media business, which is, very much focused on marketing intelligence and really understanding the omni-channel marketing landscape. And I'll turn it over to Rachel.
I'm Rachel. I'm a senior research analyst with Compare Media. I've been with Compare Media for a couple of years. My background is in journalism, and then I made the switch over a couple of years ago and haven't looked back. So we're going to be talking about, as Deborah mentioned, we're going to be talking about the pandemic. We're going to be talking about the social unrest. And we're going to be talking about how these intersect and what brands can do to best communicate with consumers given what's going on. So to help us understand why brands are responding the way they are, first we'll talk about what we know about consumers. Consumers right now are under immense stress, and it's important to understand where they stand in order to understand how and why specific messaging and campaigns are working. Then we'll spend the bulk of our time looking at some marketing examples. And these are falling into three categories: how brands are connecting with their audiences, how they're staying authentic amidst constant change, and how they can plan for future messaging despite that constant change. And then finally, we'll talk about some key considerations for moving forward with marketing.
So with that, we'll kick it off with what we know and really looking at the consumer perspective, what we know about consumer mindsets, how those have been changing over the last several months, and it's so much happening. And to start, we really wanted to look at how the coronavirus specifically has basically upended the consumer mindset and psyche. We've been at Mintel tracking consumer sentiment towards everything that's happening over the last several months. And so looking at how many consumers are worried about the prospect of being exposed to the coronavirus versus the effect on their lifestyle, we can see that the constant strain has been fairly constant over time, and it's both an emotional and financial concern here, because it's not just could I get sick, could I be exposed, it's also what are the effects on my lifestyle, whether it's you're suddenly working from home, you're suddenly homeschooling your kids, you're suddenly spending your time a lot differently, you're not commuting, you're not doing all the things that you used to do. And so it's important to just understand from a high level how this is impacting consumers, and that there is a lot going on in terms of just the constant strain on their mental well-being as a whole. And this is even more represented as we think about Americans' individualistic concerns over exposure and lifestyle effects. And this can be seen in the most common do I Google search results. So here we can see, if you see what the most pre-filled automated responses to do I in Google search are, do I have coronavirus? Do I get a stimulus check? Do I have to wear a mask? Do I have ADHD? What about, do I qualify for unemployment? So many concerns, so many different things that people are trying to find information around, trying to navigate, trying to understand. And so again, it's not just how is this affecting society, how is this affecting our communities, it's how is this affecting me, and what does that look like for me? And so as we'll get into some of what we're seeing develop, it's important to understand that separation between the impact on society and then the impact on the individual.
So as Jeanette mentioned, the concern is fairly constant. However, it has been fluctuating some. At the very beginning of things shutting down in the US, consumers weren't too worried. Then they really started worrying more towards the end of April and worrying a little bit less again now. So things are just fluctuating. And that's in part because restrictions are changing, and it's in part too because consumers' attention spans are a bit challenged. It's hard to keep worrying about the exact same thing for so many months on end. And so brands are shifting their messaging accordingly. And this is especially true given what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement. But that doesn't mean that brands have just switched over and have started ignoring the pandemic. Even when they're not explicitly saying COVID-19 or coronavirus, they're often still implying it with messages of support, with offers of support, things like that. So consumers are also shifting their mindsets about how individual responsibility plays into all of this. At the beginning of the pandemic in the US, it was all about hand washing, as I'm sure we all remember, and that really is meant to protect the person doing it. Now it's all about mask wearing, which is meant to protect others. So it would seem that there's a shift from individual problem to a community problem. And that's kind of in line with what brands have been messaging too about we're all in this together. But that might not actually be the case, as we can see with the positivity of social mentions here. So the shift from hand washing to mask wearing is kind of complicated because people are talking about wearing masks, but they're not necessarily in favor of it. They're not necessarily talking about it positively. And so that suggests that consumers aren't actually fully shifting away from this individual responsibility mindset. So what this means for brands is that it's really important to keep your messages personal and show consumers what they specifically can do to stay afloat right now.
And as we mentioned, it's not just that coronavirus is happening and what are the impacts of the coronavirus and COVID-19 and everything that that means in terms of daily life and how daily life has changed for consumers. It's also then on top of that, all of the social and civil unrest that's really been contributing to this growing divide among Americans. So it's not just, you know, whether you want to wear a mask or not, it's also where do you stand on civil rights, human rights, social justice. We know that there's an upcoming election in a few months. So it's really all of this culminating together to really, you know, overwhelm consumers right now because the media landscape and the information that is coming in and just how much information consumers are being forced to pay attention to at once is a lot. And so it's important to understand that it's not just, you know, the economic impact and the day-to-day impact of a pandemic, it's also on top of that how this has culminated with the social and civil unrest that we're seeing and what that means moving forward as this continues to evolve.
Jeanette, can I actually ask you a question about that previous slide?
Sure.
Can you define the difference between civil rights and social, between those things? Like how are they being defined as not being the same thing?
Yeah, so I mean, and this is, so here I can clarify too, we're looking specifically at social media mentions of these keywords. And the reason that we highlighted these three specifically is because there is a lot of, they do intertwine, and there's not necessarily complete separation, for example, between what's a civil right versus what's a human right, but the debate that comes to place can make it seem that way, for example. So when people talk about, for example, I don't want to wear a mask because I have civil rights as an American, that's a little misleading because that's to say that, you know, you're free in a free society and you're not, no one can tell you to wear a mask, for example. Some might say that's a civil right. That is not to say it is. Where we talk about human rights, that again is an area that can be open for interpretation in terms of you as an individual, how you define human rights versus social justice. The main thing we wanted to highlight here is that people are talking about this more than ever. I mean, mentions of all of these keywords doubled, or key phrases doubled between February and June. And so it's not so much getting caught up in the exact definition of how you might define each, but just understanding that these are all things that are on the radar for people. And they're basically trying to also navigate what do we mean when we say civil rights or human rights or social justice, because these are all phrases that are being heard a lot more these days, and depending on the context or the conversation or, what the point is you're trying to make, it can vary in terms of what the underlying or connotation might be. And that also gets into, some of the misinformation we tend to see as well. But in terms of the general conversation, these are all things that are more top of mind than months past, even looking at just between February and June. Does that help?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Great.
So given all of that conversation around civil rights, human rights, et cetera, and given the fact that the majority of American voters do support the Black Lives Matter movement, it's important to be aware that people are really paying attention to representation, and that's including in marketing. So paying attention to representation will help attract all sorts of consumers. Mintel research has found that many consumers do put their money with brands whose values align with their own. And since so many consumers do support the Black Lives Matter movement, brands really do have an opportunity to gather support from those consumers who are looking for brands that don't just say diversity matters one time, but who actually show they care about it in messaging time and time again.
And so with that, we do know that amidst all of this social and economic unrest, brands really do have to navigate this uncharted territory. And so if we look at even just what we saw happen in the month of June, for example, and moving forward from that, it wasn't just Black Lives Matter. And when we talk about Black Lives Matter, it is, this idea of the fight for social justice and the increasing civil unrest that came with that. And we know that in that time, brands couldn't necessarily afford to remain silent, particularly if, they were a company that was very much involved in the situation, whether it's Target, who is headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where much of the unrest started, and their stores were directly impacted. But again, actions speak louder than words. So to that end, brands are we're not simply showing solidarity. They really are working to double down on what their words mean with concrete actions and taking accountability for where they've been, where they're going, and the future that they want to help create. Whereas with Pride, June was Pride Month, is Pride Month, and this year, the call for intersectionality really was stronger than ever. It wasn't just let's celebrate the LGBTQ community. It was how can we elevate Black voices within this community to show solidarity with everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter. And then with COVID-19, really understanding that, with the chorus of brands all at a time where they were all standing up and saying, we're in this together, that all started to blend together. So it's not just, it's about standing apart, which really means understanding, where you lie in the mix of all of this, and understanding how to message around that. So it's not necessarily about responding to all things at all times. It's about knowing when to respond. So the question isn't, should I be engaging, but rather, how do I engage in a way that provides value? And so as we get into some of the examples that we've seen and that we've highlighted here in terms of how brands really are trying to respond to the myriad of events and recent changes in consumer behavior, that's really what it's going to come down to. How are they trying to offer value by building better connections with their customers and maintaining the authenticity of their brands? And so we'll start with that first section in how we think about creating connection with your audience and what that means. And so across industries, we have seen brands are finding ways to connect with their audience and help them basically navigate this new reality that they're living in, this new day-to-day. And so, for example, if we start with financial services, Chime, a neobank and online bank that is very much well known for positioning itself as a no-fee, very transparent online bank, they pivoted to basically offer these free tools and resources. Excuse me, my throat has a tickle in it though. They pivoted to offer these free tools and resources to make financial peace of mind available to everyone. And some of the ways that we've seen them do this amidst everything that's happening with COVID-19 is they, for example, set up this unemployment assistant for their customers. So you can essentially chat with this assistant to see if you qualify for unemployment benefits. So at a time when, we know a lot of people are unemployed, a lot of people are trying to understand what their benefits are, what's available to them. This is an example of a brand or company really stepping in to say, we know where you're at, and we want to help guide you and help get you to the resources that you need. They also partnered with 21 Savage, who's a rapper, songwriter, producer, and his foundation to empower youth for a better future. So they're going to be, they've announced that in the coming month in August, they're going to be really working to launch financial literacy tools and scholarship opportunities. And so the goal here is to basically provide resources for home learning for students and families across the country. And at a time when we know that a lot of people are home with their kids, and that financial strain is definitely top of mind for parents, that can be a great resource for parents to sit down with their kids and say, and basically help learn about financial literacy together. And Chime is stepping in to say, we can offer the tools and resources for you to do that. And then within financial services, we've also seen that, amid rising grocery prices, card issuers had to pivot to promote grocery rewards and creative campaigns. And for example, especially cards who were very much well known in the travel space and have travel rewards and very lifestyle oriented at a time where people can't travel or aren't traveling as much, can't redeem the rewards that they're used to redeeming, which may mean that card no longer will be top of wallet or top of mind to use. They pivoted to offer those grocery store rewards because they know that people are shopping for groceries more and spending more on groceries. That has become a higher spend category. And so just an example of how you can really try to pivot in terms of how you align your value proposition to align with those changing spending priorities.
So along with changing spending priorities are, of course, changing habits. And this is a really great example of a brand dealing with that, and also a great example of how a brand can use both digital and print calls to action to end up with a print message. So this is Country Time Lemonade, and this company started its own bailout fund after the U.S. launched the Paycheck Protection Program. And Country Time's bailout fund was for kids running lemonade stands that had to be shut down for social distancing. So the campaign ran in print and online and social media. Then Country Time had a website where kids could apply, and then they received checks in the mail. And so what this shows is that messages really don't need to be limited to a single medium, and you can use print to drive customers to digital media, and you can also use digital media to drive customers to print. And another way, again, that brands are driving consumers to take real life action, to experience something in the real world off screen, is through experiences. So right now, lots of brands are offering virtual experiences, but consumers, of course, are getting tired of spending so much time on screen. So some brands are figuring out ways to offer safe experiences outside the home. And an example of this is drive-in movies. Both Walmart and AT&T are hosting these. And this is a really great way for them to use a digital platform to drive engagement elsewhere. And it's also a great way for them to remind people that they don't have to live their lives entirely on screen. And brands can facilitate this by emphasizing experiences and memories that are still possible during the crisis. They may look a little bit different, but it's still possible to enjoy life despite the restrictions that are all around us.
And with that, Walmart is actually a great example of a brand that is showing that, you don't have to fully rely on digital at a time when it is important to be very agile and really reprioritize your messaging. Here we can see that Walmart has been using product placements that provide inspiration and really something to look forward to. So here with this example of, off spray, really showing, the tagline here being off to make memories. And in this example, they also show like 5 tips for a family float trip. So using that content marketing to really show this is, a great use case for our product. This is how you can think about using it. Here's an idea for a way that you can get away with your family at a time when there's very limited options to do so. And then also, again, reminding customers, this is available at Walmart. You can get it from us. You can get it online. You can get it in store. And again, really the idea here being identifying that emotional benefit that your service or product offers, and then building associations with that problem and solution. So in this example, you know, I'm stuck at home with my family. We wish we could get away. There's limited options. And Walmart stepping in to say, hey, here's an idea, and we have a great product that you can take along for the trip. So just, again, an example of really thinking about how you can tie into the current reality of people's lives by still, you know, honing your value proposition and how you can provide value to the situation. And so really the main takeaway that we're seeing in terms of how you think about connecting with your audience is that, you know, we do know that surprise and delight can go a long way, especially even in print, especially for consumers tired of screen time. You know, personally, I am someone that spends a lot of time online, partly for my job, partly, you know, for personal use. I did grow up, you know, very much attached to my phone and the screen. But I often find that I wish I could get something that would, you know, distract me from my screen. So if I'm checking my mailbox, for example, and there's something in there that really does provide value, whether it's you know, some tips for how to get away, or some very relevant product placement for something that I know that I'm buying more of or need of right now, that is more welcome now than it might have been a few months ago, because, you know, my mindset is very different right now. So really thinking about how you can help provide value, but also help surprise and delight consumers in a time when they really are looking for that, especially that separation from their screens in particular.
And if you're going to go for that surprise and delight and to really achieve that connection with customers, you really have to be authentic. And that's tough given the constant change that's happening, but it is possible. So it is possible for brands to stay true to who they are, but to also adjust messaging as need be and as consumers' needs change. So an example of this comes from Uber. So Uber achieved really great authenticity and also trustworthiness in its messaging about safety. So starting out earlier in the pandemic, Uber ran this print campaign saying, when you stay home, we'll help move what matters. So it was a serious tone, but very sincere. And it explained that it was giving free rides for healthcare workers and others in need. And again, really stressing the importance of staying home. And so that helped set the tone for what became Uber's eventual requirement to wear masks. And it was important for Uber to publicize this requirement, of course, to set expectations so passengers would know what to expect, but also so that all consumers, regardless of whether they were taking Uber or not, would know the company's stance. And Uber is taking that strong stance, primarily, of course, because it cares about safety, but it also shows that the company cares about people knowing that it's willing to take that stance in the first place. Uber wants people to know it's willing to act quickly, that's willing to be flexible, that's willing to institute these new policies as needs arise. And so this is the sort of thing that could even pop up in direct mail, might pop up in mailed coupons. These might include something like templates for making your own mask. There are ways that Uber could continue to engage with consumers. And so along the lines of mask wearing are, of course, the mask wearing requirements by these large retailers. So Walmart, Home Depot, Target, a ton of others have recently introduced the requirements for masks. And so Walmart's mask requirement, sort of like Uber's requirement, evolved from its other policies. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we can see the sticker that Walmart had on the floor. I'm sure we're all familiar with these social distancing stickers. So this sticker didn't have Walmart's logo, but it was in Walmart blue. It was in the signature typeface. So it really shows that this is sort of an inherent part of the Walmart brand. Then later on in April, Walmart introduced no contact pickup, much as a bunch of other retailers did. And it complemented this with reminders in print about grocery pickup, which was and continues to be especially relevant. And then we have this post on Twitter about face masks and the requirement to wear them inside Walmart. So this got a lot of engagement on social media, but as you might remember from that slide earlier, might not have been the most positive sentiment on social media. But it's important that Walmart really stuck to it and stuck to its stance. It's interesting too that some brands, as we're seeing, are bowing to social pressure to change prejudiced practices, but very few, if any for that matter, are bowing to pressure to undo these stringent safety measures. And so this shows that brands are willing to evolve their stance, but they're also willing to stand by their values.
And as we mentioned, it's not just how our brand's responding to COVID-19 and all the restrictions and policies that may come with that. It's also how are they responding to everything we're seeing around, the social unrest and Black Lives Matter in particular, and how is that evolving. And so one brand that is a good example of how to really be authentic in your approach is Ben & Jerry's. And the reason that we really wanted to highlight them is because, yes, they stood out for very explicitly decrying white supremacy, but it's because it's not the first time that the brand has addressed the issue. About 4 years ago, they publicly stated their support for the Black Lives Matter movement at a time when most brands were not. And so now, 4 years later, they're just reinforcing a message that they've been standing by for years now. And so again, just an example of it's not just this is timely, this is now suddenly really relevant, and so you should have a statement. For a brand like Ben & Jerry's, it's part of their social, it's part of their brand mission and persona and everything that they stand for. They are very much a social justice brand. They pretty much stand up and talk about every issue that comes about. It's not just Black Lives Matter. We see them make statements about a variety of issues. And so for them, it's not just a timely, time to jump on the bandwagon. It's just another day for them to reinforce what they stand for as a company. Their founders and CEOs have been very public in terms of, their own values and how that plays into the Ben & Jerry's brand. And so just an example of it's not just you're supposed to say something because everyone's saying something. It's does this align with who you are as a company, as a brand? And if so, then yes, it is a good time for you to really emphasize that and highlight that, not because it's new, but because it's always been something that you stand for and believe in and is intrinsic to your brand values. On the other end of that, we also saw a company like Twitter, who employs many people and who's obviously very well known in the tech space, but was also one of the few companies to really speak to the intersection of what we were seeing with Black Lives Matter with other issues. Their awareness about the links between COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter, for example. We know that coronavirus impacts minorities more than others. They're more likely to get sick and not have access to the needed resources. Similarly, they were also talking about the intersection of Black Lives Matter and pride, and then how the LGBTQ community is really no stranger to protest and their fight for equality. And so really just showing the awareness, not just as a company and what they stand for, but really for their employees and the people that they employ, and their stance on diversity and equity and inclusion and what that means for them as a company. And that means understanding who their employees are and really making sure that they've created a workplace that really stands with that, both publicly, but then also internally. And so just a good example there of how those two play a part, not just, for public PR, but internally and how your employees feel about the company that they work at and how they're supported.
And so it's about consumers, it's about employees, but then it's also, of course, about the businesses that have relationships with one another. So these brand relationships do hold a lot of weight. It's not just what your brand stands for, it's also about what the brands you associate with stand for. And the Facebook ad boycott is a really good example of how social concerns can affect business relationships. So in mid-June, civil rights groups called for businesses to pause their Facebook ads during July. And this campaign, which is called Stop Hate for Profit, was meant to apply public pressure on Facebook to basically stop generating revenue from content that amplifies hate speech. It was also to get Facebook to stop allowing posts that incite violence or spread misinformation. And so, ad budgets, of course, are already being reduced, and some brands are even in their off season. So it was an opportune time to join the boycott. And it's been effective in terms of spend. Week over week, spend was reduced by nearly half in the first week of this boycott. And this boycott also reveals an opportunity for print marketing. So with print marketing, you can have more of a say over what your marketing is running adjacent to. Unlike on Facebook, when a brand's ad might show up next to content it's not too pleased with, that's not necessarily the case for print. And another example of brand relationships is the now Washington football team. So after years of pressure, the team finally changed its name. And it wasn't just that fans were pressuring the organization. What really did it for them was that brands were pressuring it too, and especially FedEx. So FedEx has the naming rights to the team's field, and FedEx wrote a letter to the team saying, change your name or we're going to leave the deal for the field. And so basically the team couldn't afford to not change its name. And so as soon as it changed its name, new merchandise got out there. And because the name Washington Football Team will still actually be accurate after it gets a more permanent name, it can last in the future. That merchandise will still be relevant. And this is something to keep in mind with print media. Since you aren't able to be quite as agile as maybe digital media, you can think about messages that will still be relevant even if specific details change. And so that brings us to another takeaway for this section, and that's that brands can reinforce their authenticity by staying consistent in priorities and policies across media, but also being flexible with their messaging. So you can do this by, for example, complementing digital campaigns with print campaigns. That's something Walmart did, for instance, by building awareness about that grocery pickup, while also promoting curbside pickup. And that really can show that your priorities and policies are consistent across media. And this is important, not just in digital channels, but it's also really important in print. So as you start planning for the future, of course, we know everything is in flux. So what that means is that you should plan for what you can and then be ready for changing what you can't. So as you do plan for the future, you can think about what consumers are looking forward to and why they're looking forward to it. Long-term habits are changing, so try to understand which shifts in consumer habits might be permanent. So for instance, people who tried new online services like grocery delivery might be more open to using those long-term. Then people are facing financial stress. At the same time, they're trying to get back to normal. So you should keep financial and health constraints in mind, but don't be afraid to look for those hopeful ways that people can regain some sense of normalcy. And then along those lines, the holidays are going to be different. Black Friday has already been sort of canceled by some brands, but at the same time, people are going to want to get together with families as they usually do. And that might be difficult, but it is possible to facilitate that sense of togetherness in some way. And one way to keep consumers hopeful, to give them some sense of enjoyment right now, is through entertainment. And some brands have been highlighting their offerings by reacting to the Black Lives Matter movement and by showcasing Black created content. So one example of this is streaming service Tubi, which highlighted Black created shows on its website. Now the company didn't really promote this on social media or elsewhere for that matter, so it might have been hard for consumers to learn about it. And that might take a toll in the long run, since consumers will probably remember, what they knew about. Of course, they can't remember what they didn't know about. But at this point, there's still a chance for Tubi to keep this campaign going, to get some messaging out across channels. And then we have Netflix, on the other hand. Netflix has long been vocal about racial equality. And as part of that, it runs this really outspoken Twitter account called Strong Black Lead. And as per usual, the account didn't beat around the bush in its anti-racist demands. And it also retweeted followers, and that shows that it's willing to engage on the topic. It's willing to have a conversation. Now, there's been some criticism that treating Black content as only a learning opportunity actually diminishes that content, rather than treating it as great stories, great art. So brands should be careful that they're not just using this content as tokens. And so as they do that, there is another opportunity for print, and that's about communicating about that actual value of the art, communicating about those stories. That can be a longer lasting message. So as you do highlight the value of products and services, you can think about their inherent value, not just the particular value that is relevant today.
And similarly, we've talked a lot about the open letters that companies are putting out. And here we have an example of Bank of America, who did run full-page ads laying out its future plans for promoting equality. So while from a timely perspective, this is incredibly timely. It's something that we know is, a big topic of conversation. And so it works very well right now. It's a powerful statement. They're talking about their commitment to investing $1 billion over the next 4 years. But we know in terms of planning ahead, that also means how can someone like Bank of America, for example, think about what this messaging and how they message around this looks moving forward, because it's not just one statement about your commitment and that's it. We know that consumers are increasingly holding companies accountable so they can think about over the next 4 years, how can they plan their messaging accordingly to really update their customers and their communities in terms of the progress that they're making and how this is an ongoing commitment, not a one-time commitment when it's in top of mind for everyone. It's something that they truly are committed to over time. And so really, print in particular kind of has sort of permanence to it because, it's there, it's in writing, you can save it. I mean, especially when you think about print, I know I've had times where there's been stories that I've run that I've held on to because I think they're important, something that I'd like to reference back to later. But again, it's also that seriousness that can't necessarily be conveyed in digital channels. So really thinking about moving forward, how can we convey these messages in print and really have that permanence to them and that also historical appeal as well. And another example in terms of moving forward and thinking about, what's coming, if we think about back to school. We know back to school is going to look very different. I mean, it depends on the school's district right now in terms of whether you're going to be back in school, you're going to be in school every day, or just some days on, some days off. It's all very much in flux. And so Old Navy, for example, took a departure from its typical back to school ads where we see kids jumping on school buses and going to school. To basically honor everything that's happening right now and the young activists that are really being vocal. And so this We Are We campaign highlights efforts from 5 activists, which include the narrator, who's a 15-year-old feminist, racial equality activist, and founder of 100 Black Girl Books. And while this has been running on TV and digital, this is an example of something that if we think about, for print, what could this look like? These messages are very strong and powerful, and we know that kids are sitting at home. So how can we think about, providing those print materials or resources that can really engage kids in the conversation at a time when, they may be bombarded with a lot of different messages and there's a lot of tough conversations that may be happening at home with their parents. And so planning ahead, again, what does that mean for how we think about back to school? And then, of course, the upcoming holidays as well. As we know, families are spending a lot of time together, and in particular, that parent-child dynamic and the conversation that could potentially be taking hold.
So as you're looking ahead to planning future messaging, keep in mind that print is, of course, a really great medium for awareness. And it's especially true with open letters, as we saw with that Bank of America letter. That really helps brands show that they're serious about an issue. And these letters can effectively communicate that a brand understands the gravity of a cause. They can communicate that a brand is also willing to hold itself accountable because these letters actually stick around physically in the real world. And so customers and consumers can hold them accountable too. So looking at what's next, of course, there's no shortage of changes happening, and flexibility is key. Thinking on your toes is key, especially as so many major events are converging. So to do that, brands should really pay attention to consumers' attitudes and behaviors and how those are changing. And that's true not just with regards to the pandemic, but also beyond that. None of these issues is completely separate from the others, so it's important to pay attention to how each issue is affecting the others.
And so with that, if we look back on some of the 3 main areas that we kind of went through, when we talk about, creating connection with your audience, it's really just about understanding that while this pandemic and all the social unrest that's happening affects everyone, it doesn't affect everyone equally. And so companies really are being forced to address the growing inequities and disproportionate access to needed resources. And so that really does mean that it's not enough to just focus on digital tools, for example. It's really thinking about what is your omnichannel approach? How are you making sure you're being consistent in your approach and in your messaging across all channels, and really how you are uniquely positioned to help specific subsets of customers, because it's not, we're all in this together. We're all at very different places and very different, facing very different scenarios. And so it's really about honing in on how you're uniquely positioned to help different needs and to really provide value. And when we talk about achieving authenticity amidst constant change, part of pivoting brand success has been the novelty of some of their offerings right now, whether it's free trials or discounts or new rewards, but that novelty will soon wear off, especially, if consumers' financial woes worsen. So it's really important to understand that brands that continue to boost loyalty will be those that do introduce meaningful shifts in their services and pricing, rather than the sort of superficial or gimmicky things that we can see at times. It's really, yes, how can I provide value in the short term, in the immediate time, but then, how does this play into a longer term strategy, and really trying to think through what this means moving forward. And then, again, as we think about strategic planning for future messaging, we know that consumers, and I'm sure all of you on the line, me included, we're reminded of COVID-19 and everything that's happening really every day. It can get noisy, our news feeds are overwhelming. And so we do tend to remember the outliers, what are the things that are offering that support messaging, and really have that opportunity to stand out at a time when, it can feel sort of extraordinary to distract or really provide that value that we're seeking at a time where our needs are constantly changing and we're overwhelmed with everything that we're seeing. And so with that, I think we will open it up for Q&A.
To say that the audience was riveted would be an understatement. Nobody moved. Nobody was really commenting. I think everyone was just going, okay, how do I apply this to my world? If you don't mind, maybe you can, everyone, please, take a screenshot of this information so you can connect with Jeanette and Rachel on LinkedIn. And maybe, Jeanette, if you can unshare your screen, we can let people unmute themselves and turn on their video if they want to contribute or ask a question. I have a few comments while everyone is gathering their thoughts. The first is that just, as a follow-up to your slide about Uber, in May, they actually let go of 3,000 people via Zoom. So they're kind of on the bad list again, although they might have done something. So might want to caveat that next time you bring it up. But the other thing I wanted to mention is something that we spoke about before the webinar started, which was that I've been watching television commercials as my version of doing consumer research, and in the new commercials, and I know they're new because people are wearing face masks, and you can tell, the attention to diversity is extraordinary. From General Electric, Unilever, several credit card companies, rental car companies, anything having to do with finances. It's just absolutely incredible. As well, I've noticed that the demographic of white people has actually gotten much lower. So when you do see a white person, they're more of like the millennials, and let's say not power people or people you might have thought of in power positions, wearing suits and running around and doing things like that. So it's really interesting how it's manifested, because even if I never saw a tweet from General Electric about any statement about COVID, about social issues, anything like that, even if I don't know what their policies are on repair people wearing masks, even if I don't know where they stand on, social and racial injustice, I am watching a television commercial that is showing me life in all the colors of the rainbow, and I will absorb that through that visual. So it's really important that not only am I seeing that visual, but it is being carried through in everything that they do, to your point about authenticity and going back to Ben and Jerry's, going back, if we look at Nike, which you guys didn't actually mention, but it's a classic example because they supported Colin Kaepernick back when everybody was like, this is insane. Why are you doing this? They lost a bunch of customers, but they also got a 23% increase, I believe, in business at that time. So thank you so much for your insight. I believe Kelly put herself on video, which means she probably has something to say. Kelly Malazzi.
Hi, everybody. I think my lens is dirty again, Deb, but sorry.
It is. Your kids.
First of all, that was extraordinary. Thank you very much. I, as Deb said, was very riveted, and I was taking pictures of the screens. And I don't know if most of the people on this call are in the graphic arts, or if most of us are printers or in the print world. But I guess my question, and this is really for everybody, is for companies that really don't have a position on a lot of the things that we've talked about today, where is a good place to start, I guess, is my question, because I feel like our industry has kind of been tangential to this, and I feel like what you're saying really needs to land, and I don't think the people that need to hear it are on this call right now. So I really want to try to figure out how to help the owners and the people that are responsible for the messaging in the printing industry to start to internalize some of this stuff. We have a long way to go in this industry for representation, both from a minority perspective and from a female perspective. We're constantly thinking about this. I know that's a super huge question, and I'm going to stop now. So.
No, I mean, I can jump in quickly. I mean, and to be fair, we work in market research, and even then, we have our own issues in terms of really, diversity and representation and how we think about that. And we've had a lot of discussions, internally at our own company in terms of individually how we all feel and sharing our feedback in terms of everything that's happening and how we think that relates to our workplace and our experience there and what we hope to hear from our leadership and moving forward. But I think it comes down to every company at the end of the day has their sort of brand mission or vision or that statement that you pretty much point to when people ask, what are you about and who is your company? So that's not necessarily going to mention, their stance on social justice or, any of those types of issues, but it will have those sort of values, I guess, that you claim to hold to high regard and that you say that you hire against and that you really value. So how do those things play into how you think about diversity, how you think about representation, how you think about inclusion? Because I think that's the starting point, right? Okay, who do we say we are as a company? What do we say we believe and stand for? And is that keeping up with, the times and also what our employees are asking for, what our customers are asking for? And I think it's very much okay to admit that you're not there yet, but that you're aware and you're going to work to get there. I think that's mostly what many people are asking for, and companies are afraid to say the wrong thing because we do know we live in a culture where, especially with social media, everyone will immediately jump on you and say they disagree with what you said or, have something negative to say. But if you're sticking by what you're grounded under within your brand mission and vision, I think it's a matter of betting on yourself and the long term of your company, as opposed to that risk that there might be some people that are not happy with what you say.
And I think grounding it in your values is important too, because it's sort of, you're in a bind if you're not talking about this sort of stuff, because if you suddenly start talking about it, people might think, well, that's disingenuous. Why just to come out of the blue start caring about this stuff? On the other hand, if you don't talk about it, people are going to wonder why you're not talking about it. So I think, as Jeanette said, grounding it in the values that do exist is a really great place to start. And also, as Jeanette said, not being afraid to say, we haven't been thinking about this enough and we're going to start. That's another good way to make it not seem sudden and sort of inauthentic.
Is there any indication through research, or maybe it's a future research opportunity, to see if brands who have made a stance on this are working with advertising agencies who've made a stance on this or need to in order to work with these brands, as far as how far down the vendor chain this might go? If I'm Nike, for example, am I going to make sure that everybody I'm working with in my ecosystem is on my same page because they're representing me? And that might actually be helpful, Kelly, in this situation. Ladies, any comments on that?
I mean, the complicated part there is that in an ideal sense, yes, they want to say that they're everyone that they work with and every vendor that they work with. Even if we look at a company like Nike, for example, who in terms of branding and their campaigns, they're not new to this sort of provocative advertising. They've been doing it for decades. But we also know that, some of their factories and some of the ethical concerns around Nike are still there. And so I think it's a matter of also just being realistic with, no, we can't guarantee that every step of the way, we're at a place where everything is ethical, everything is, by the book. Like we can, point to every step of the way and say that, there's no cause for concern or that someone might not raise an issue. Because even a company like Nike, you know, people will bring that up. They'll launch a new brand. A million people will love the campaign. They just launched a new one. I personally love the creative work of it. But immediately in the comments, you'll see, well, what about the child workers?
Right.
Or what about, so though you can't get away from those things, but I think it's also increasingly, you can't pretend you don't know about it, because people will call you out and then you don't really have an excuse because they're telling you. So.
Is there any research that correlates maybe my personal position on this with the companies I choose to do business with in my professional world as well as my personal world?
I know that there is research that shows that consumers, as you consume, people tend to look for brands that align with them. So people who care about, for example, workers' rights will look for brands that also care about workers' rights. There's a huge correlation between spending with those brands and what you yourself care about. Now, in terms of your business relationships, I don't have research off the top of my head, but I would imagine that, I mean, we're all people when we get down to it. We're all people. So I would imagine it's basically impossible to ignore.
Yeah, I mean,
I would hope so. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I just keep, like, this just keeps occurring to me more and more every single day as I hear people like you who are clearly digital natives and are significantly younger. You know, my colleague Bill just put up a video the other day about this unboxing kind of user experience that he had. And the topic was shrink wrapping your styrofoam, because this bed that he bought, the company shrink wrapped the styrofoam, and it was all about what a wonderful user experience that was. And he had a guy comment, a younger person clearly, who the only thing he saw in that was disaster for the environment. And so I'm looking at Bill, who's 60, like, dude, they're gonna bring the hammer down on you about this. You know, and on the one hand, I wanted to look at it as like, dude, you're missing the point. It's about the user experience. And then on this hand, I wanted to be like, dude, you're missing the point. People care about the environment and how complicated that is, and how much, you know, sometimes these things get conflated because, you know, to your point about all you said about your values and things like this is a recruiting issue for when we want to bring younger people into our industry and tell them why it's a cool place to work and it's a place that makes them comfortable and fits in with their values and fits in with their requirements for authenticity.
They don't have to take a shower when they go home thinking, you know, well,
Yes.
what did I do during the day? It's not what I believe in. It's not what I
Right.
want to be part of. I mean, the younger people, the Gen Zers I speak to, they want to do something that benefits the world in some way. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I wanted
No,
to support
and that's
what you're
just it.
saying.
And the buyers too, right? So this gentleman who commented on that post is, you know, my gut reaction is always to be like, oh, this kid posted. I'm like, wait, no, he's a grown man. This is a grown man who's well into his 30s who wants people to know that he cares about the environment. And again, like, and so it's really about being mindful about these things that my generation and older just want to toss away. It's like, they're just too particular. They care about too many things. And my God, we could talk for hours about cancel culture and, you know, the idea that the Washington Redskins probably wouldn't have changed their name if not for that probably decades long battle about doing what was right. And it wasn't until their existence was threatened. They, as you said in your presentation, they couldn't afford not to change. Like, it's kind of a bummer that, like, it took a genuine threat to their existence for them to actually, you know, make the change. But, you know, I was just watching a John Oliver episode the other night where there's a girl doing a makeup tutorial, and in the middle of it, she starts talking about concentration camps in China, you know, and that, to your point about Nike was involved in that Uyghur situation. And, you know, it's like, it's not that hard to be informed. You can't keep secrets anymore. You know, young teenagers are going to get out there and tell their stories in sometimes very surreptitious ways. So I guess I just want us all on this call together to, like, try to figure out ways that we can start to make very, very small but relevant changes. Angie's a great example. She's on this call right now. She's constantly talking about, she just switched jobs. What a wonderful place she works and why. Right. You know, like, I hope that we all can find, you know, reasons to do that and talk about why it's such a great place to work, and, you know, trying to attract, attract people to this industry.
Right. Hey, Angie, to your point though, Kelly, it's not so much about you telling your stories, it's how are other people telling your story? And
Yeah.
that's what happened with the packing peanuts that were shrink wrap, whatever. Bill was telling his story, but that's not how it was retold. That's the problem. That's the optics. That's the visual. That's the brand message that you're saying. I know Bill's not like that, but he's literally saying, I don't care about the environment. I thought this was really cool. I mean, that's what the millennial heard. Angie, did you want to say something? And then I'm sure the Rachel and Jeanette need to go back to researching for us. So we'll end the webinar after this.
Well, thank you guys so much. It was fantastic, like Kelly said, and I have to agree with everything that Kelly was saying before. And I think that's the most complicated situation that we're in right now, is everybody's just like walking this line of, wanting to promote what they do and be excited about life and their experiences, and then also worrying about offending every single other person. And, what I think is just amazing though about this is we're all learning together. I would say, like, we're kind of all entering into this territory a little wobbly, and like I don't really know where I'm going or what's happening, but I hope that I'm doing the right thing. And I think the other thing to comment about that is I've been listening to Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People book, which was written in like the 40s, I believe. And although there's a lot of really funny things that make me laugh because it was written in the 40s, there are some really like foundational messages that he puts across, like be respectful to people, don't complain. I mean, there's a lot of things that if we just kind of like all sort of come back down and like be genuine with one another, it really doesn't have to be that complicated. Be respectful, be genuine, but at the same time, it's completely complicated. So
It really is. And one of the reasons I'm so happy that we were able to have this discussion today is because brands really are great examples of at least something to follow. And adapting it to yourself and seeing how they communicate their messages across social media and how they're showing it to you on the internet and what they're talking about on the blogs and what they reshare and who they're supporting. And you can apply these things to yourself in some way. I mean, there were plenty of examples with, if you're having difficulty, let's work out payment plans for things like the Chime Bank did, or the other people. If you have questions about, anything that we can help you with. I mean, there are actually print shops who are selling hand sanitizer because they can get an the hold of industrial sized things. So you can be really helpful to people and let them know that you care in a myriad of ways besides, just trying to sell them something and only checking in through that. And ladies, thank you so much. Comparemedia.com or just compare.com? I forget now. Comparemedia.com?
Yeah.
Yeah, comparemedia.com.
You guys check out the website. Please connect with Rachel and Jeanette on LinkedIn. August 25th through 27th, we're having the Elevate Print Conference. So everybody check that out on printmediacenter.com. It touches upon some of this, is intertwined with ways that you can, think about growing your business during this time. And again, thank you everybody so much for your time today. Print long and prosper, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.